Hi, everybody. Joe Cioffi here. Weather in 5 days and 5 minutes. And coming up tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, we're going to, of course, talk about Tropical Storm Debby as it brings torrential rains for parts of North Florida, South Georgia, and the Carolinas. And eventually, it looks like that rain will be moving up the East Coast. Meanwhile, we have severe weather from the upper Mississippi Valley eastward to New England tonight. There's some warm weather, but not excessive heat in the western part of the United States. That's helping them to uh, control the wildfires there. So we'll cover it all tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast at 7:35 p.m. Eastern Time. And this is what it looks like on the satellite loop. Debbie has now inland and made landfall near Cedar Key in Florida this morning as a 80-mile-an-hour hurricane. But as we've been saying for the last number of days, the bigger story here is really going to be the rain now going forward. And you notice all this tropical moisture just building through Georgia into South Carolina. We still have a well-defined circulation that is moving through North Florida and southernmost Georgia. Eventually, it's going to make an exit off the Georgia coast. And after that is where it gets interesting for both the southeast coast of the United States and then down the road as you go northeastward. So we're watching these upper troughs that are moving from west to east. You can see the northern jet here. That's all that cloud cover that runs from the Dakotas eastward through the Great Lakes and into New England. It's moving these upper troughs along, and as each one goes by, you wind up with some showers and thunderstorms. And as we check out the radar, let's first look at Debbie. Uh, Very heavy rains right now in North Florida. A number of flash flood warnings are up, and we have also heavy rains in South Georgia, well south of Atlanta, by the way, and getting some heavier rain bands now moving into coastal South Carolina, and some are even approaching southeastern North Carolina. So we're going to be seeing all this rain pretty much increase as we go through the rest of this afternoon and into this evening. This radar, by the way, is as of 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time. In the Northeast, we've been seeing clusters of showers moving through in upstate New York and northern New England. We've got some thunderstorms and some severe weather in southwestern New York, another cluster of storms over Lake Erie. Then going back west, we have some showers and some thunderstorms that are going on through northern Wisconsin, back through Minnesota, and just a minimal activity that's out to the west. Storm Prediction Center for today, rest of today and tonight. We have a marginal to slight risk from Maine, southeastward through New England, across upstate New York, into northern Pennsylvania. Most of eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England is going to be outside this zone. The risk area continues, another area of slight risk from northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin, including Chicago and Milwaukee, northwestward into northwestern Iowa and southeastern Minnesota, a 2 to 5% tornado risk there. We have severe weather risks for coastal South Carolina down into northern Florida because of Debby. And that means tornado risk as well, 2 to 5% tornado risk, and a small 2% tornado risk in southern Vermont and in New Hampshire. And for tomorrow, as we look ahead, SPC has a marginal risk a little bit further south than today, southern Connecticut, Long Island, back across the lower Hudson Valley, New York City through Pennsylvania. They have added a slight risk zone in northeastern Ohio and into western Pennsylvania, the marginal risk going back into extreme northeastern Illinois, a marginal risk in coastal South Carolina that possibly could get expanded a little bit depending on how Debbie tracks and what it does. And in the meantime, we've got another marginal risk zone from South Dakota northwestward into Montana, and a marginal risk area in the southern half of Arizona for day three. And this is Wednesday into Thursday. Again, another narrow area of marginal risk in the coastal Carolinas and a marginal risk going up in the Western Plains. Now, rainfall, the big deal here. And obviously, there's already been rain in much of the areas in the southeast. So we're talking an additional, the yellow area represents 10 to 15 inches of additional rain for parts of coastal South Carolina and a 10 to 15 inch area that extends further north into North Carolina and further south back into southeast Georgia. The 5 inch plus line covers most of southeast Georgia, and then runs up through central Virginia, and then continues into central Pennsylvania and through central New England. We are seeing an area of 5 to 7 inches being indicated, and this is due to the Debby rains, at least the way WPC sees it, that the Debby rains will make it up the coast late this week. We're looking at a 5 to 7 inch total rainfall for the next 7 days from southeastern New England through southern New England, Long Island, back to New York City, into New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. So a lot of rain forecast here in the eastern part of the United States. Lesser amounts, a little finger of 3/4 of an inch to an inch and a half through the lower Great Lakes, back through Wisconsin and into Minnesota, and also up and down the Rockies. And in parts of the Southwest that we're seeing a half to 3/4 of an inch amounts, with some pockets of an inch and a half being indicated in central and southern Colorado. Flash flooding, big deal here. High risk for flash flooding. Northern Florida, southern Georgia, southeastern. I always have trouble trying to figure out how to describe this part of the state of South Carolina. But when you get to the other side into South Carolina, you can see there's a small area of high risk. The moderate risk going further north. Looks like the moderate risk is north of Charleston. The slight risk to the North Carolina state line. We have a marginal to slight risk with the severe weather tonight from New England westward into the western Great Lakes. And taking a look at tomorrow, we have a high risk for flash flooding in southeast Georgia and South Carolina, moderate risk that goes further south into Georgia and further west into Georgia, and also further northeast into North Carolina. Also, a small area of moderate risk tomorrow, southeastern Pennsylvania and central and parts of southern New Jersey, with a slight risk area covering the rest of eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England. And that's with this weather front coming down from the north. So you've got these two systems in play. When we talk about the rainfall amounts, you have to sort of put them together. And then as we move on to day 3, this is Wednesday into Thursday, we have a slight risk pushing up to central New Jersey. The Debby rains are in North Carolina and South Carolina and still going on in Georgia, where we have a moderate to high risk. So a couple of things that we want to show you here. First off, this is the Hurricane Debby model track guidance. And what we've noticed in the last several runs, and certainly in this run, is they've all seemed to come around to the idea that Debby will probably, at least the vast majority of the models say that Debby will move off the coast of Georgia, straddle the South Carolina, the Carolina coast, and then come inland, and then continue on a track to the northeast later this week. Now there was some conflict with some models trying to turn it back westward into Georgia, and we've been sort of leaning on the idea that the European model has been, and the Icon model, and now the Canadian model, all seem to have been much more consistent with bringing this storm system up the East Coast and bringing the rains all the way up the East Coast, rather than keeping it and lingering it into the southeastern part of the United States, and then the rain was never going to get here, or either we get ejected out to the northeast of the ocean, or just kind of play itself out over time. But it's looking increasingly more likely that we're going to see this system track northeastward, along or just inland of the coast, and that's going to make a big difference in terms of who gets what with respect to rainfall. This is the latest European model from today, and you can follow Debby along. Also, notice that you've got thunderstorms here coming through for tomorrow and into tomorrow night. I'll just back it up a little bit so you can see what's going on for today. It's mostly in upstate New York and interior New England, and also back in the areas around the Great Lakes. That second trough brings showers and storms for later tomorrow night. And here's Debby offshore, and it could strengthen back to a hurricane if it stays out over the waters long enough. The European strengthens it. The Icon strengthens it considerably, bringing it inland right between Charleston and Myrtle Beach. And then it turns northward through North Carolina and then moves northeastward from there. And you can see all that heavy rain just sweeps on up into New England. The GFS has been insisting that this thing is just going to loop back westward into South Georgia. And then eventually the moisture would come up because you have a cold front that's coming through late this week, and it'll bring the moisture up, but the core becomes more of a non-tropical system that moves on up to the northeast. It's another important factor here is that how much of the core of the system remains as it moves northward, because oftentimes it's when you maintain the core of the circulation, even though it's no longer really a tropical storm or a hurricane the way it was down in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, or when it's off the southeast coast. But if the core holds together, you're going to have a core of very heavy rain that moves northward up the eastern seaboard. So we're kind of leaning to the idea of the European and the icon model, which it just has a cleaner look to it, and it seems to me that it's the more logical approach to how this is all going to play. And I'll show you the icon model here, and it brings it out offshore, actually strengthens it to a strong Category 2 hurricane, bringing it back in, much like the European, right on the North Carolina, South Carolina border, then turning it northward late in the week. This would be for Friday morning, and bringing heavy rains during the day Friday. An inland low track would mean that the heaviest rains would go to the west in Pennsylvania and maybe western New Jersey. If the low track's a little bit further to the east, the heavy rain area will shift to the east. The heaviest rains tend to be on the west side of the circulation center when they reach our latitude. It's the opposite when you go down in the lower latitudes, but this is how it's going to play. And I'll leave you with one positive note is that if this does play out this way, after the rains move away, we're going to get a nice shot of low humidity and dry air for the weekend and into the start of next week. So think about that, folks, to make the humidity completely disappear, I think would be a good thing. So we'll see you tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast at 7:35 p.m. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.